today or die.
Hello and welcome. I am so glad you're joining me. Today, you will hear the story of a woman who, at age 60, decided to leverage her decades of knowledge and experience in the human resources industry to launch her own company. She is the true definition of an entrepreneur, having quickly built a thriving business serving the human resources needs of employers in the Chattanooga region. This is the Empowered Career Woman podcast, broadcast from the Whitfield Media Group studios in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The Empowered Career Woman is proudly presented by Medicare Misty. Medicare Misty is a real person who can help answer your Medicare questions. Get real help from her team at MedicareMisty.com. And I'm your host, Lisa McCluskey, and now let's podcast. Today, I am so pleased to be joined by Maggie Carrington. She is a seasoned HR strategist and business advisor, and as I mentioned, she has over 35 years of experience. She founded HR Habitude and Candor and Courage at Work. Welcome, Maggie.
Lisa, thanks very much for having me. I really look forward to our conversation today.
Well, it is a pleasure to host you again. Maggie recently did an episode for the Silver Divorce podcast, and that episode was to help people get back in the workforce if they have been stay-at-home moms or maybe working part-time or even experienced a absence in their work history. She gave some great tips on how to get back in the workforce and what to expect from the job interview process. So I'm so excited now that we get to focus on your career and how you got to where you are and how you launched your own company.
Well, delighted to delve into that with you and provide some insights that hopefully encourage others to consider their own paths.
Great. All right. Well, let's start. Let's just start with the simple. Talk about where you went to school and your majors.
Sure. Well, I began working full-time at 18, and so the whole time that I worked, I was going to school part-time. Ultimately ended up finishing my bachelor's degree through the Quest program at Covenant College a couple of years after relocating to Chattanooga.
Okay. And what was your bachelor's degree in?
Organizational management.
Okay. So not at that time, you weren't thinking human resources.
Well, that was the program that was really available through Quest, and it was designed to encompass business people of all walks.
Okay.
Although I will say the first time I took a class in human resources, I'd already been a practitioner in human resources for a decade. So I think that was a little intimidating for the professor and certainly insightful for me.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, you could have been teaching that class by that point.
We both kind of thought that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. So what was your first job then? And how old were you at the time?
Yeah. So I had an unpaid job when I was probably 15, and that was entering football scouting reports into a mainframe computer by learning basic C programming.
So how did you get into football scouting reports? That's a little different.
That is a little different. It was just an opportunity that came up in our high school where the football team was led by somebody who was friends with a man in town who owned a computer store. And that was long before PCs.
Yeah.
So that was all mainframe work. And I was fascinated by the technology and the opportunity to learn. And so raised my hand and said, oh, I'll give that a whirl. And so did that for a couple of seasons. And enjoyed the experience of learning C programming and certainly really getting a handle on how some of the earliest applications of data analysis was going to be supported by the computer.
Mm-hmm. That's a great experience, a way to get accustomed to the mainframe environment, which has really evolved since then.
Oh my, yes.
Yeah. And so from high school then, I think you mentioned that you worked at Dairy Queen.
I did work at Dairy Queen probably when I was 16, 17 years old. We had a Dairy Queen there in town. I remember the timing of that specifically because it coincided with when I got my driver's license. So that was a big deal to not have to ride my bike to work.
Yeah. I always said that everybody should do a stint in either retail or a service environment because it teaches you so much about people.
It does, and it's kind of amusing to me today to go into those environments, particularly around fast food or Dairy Queen specifically, and see how many people there are.
Mm-hmm.
When I worked there, we'd have busloads roll in, and there might be 3 of us.
Oh, wow.
Right? And so we still had to take care of the customer and do all those things. So it's just kind of interesting to see how that's evolved.
Yeah, I think probably in large part because we have no patience as a society. So you think about Dairy Queen, and they can't make it until you actually order whatever shake that is, and it takes time to do that. So I think our impatience as a society has played into that.
I agree, and that's a really good point. We had folks that waited for a long time for their meals and shakes and such, but that was just what was
That's what we
natural
did,
then,
right?
and
Yeah.
Right, that was just how it was staffed.
Just
so,
how it was.
yep.
So, okay, from there, after you worked at the Dairy Queen, at what point did you, I know you kind of evolved into human resources. So what was the genesis of your desire to work in human resources?
Well, I didn't choose human resources; it chose me.
Okay.
I was halfway through the 8-year tenure of the computer disk manufacturing company when we were acquired by what was then a Fortune 500 company. And I had done a little bit of everything. I joined that organization 3 weeks before we moved into the building, answered the phone, ordered items for our proprietary custom-built machining operations, helped to build out a Class 100 clean room, all kinds of things. And when we were acquired, the president of the company looked at me and said, "Maggie, we're about to be part of a really big company and we don't have personnel. You're it."
Okay. So you were working for, did you say a computer disk manufacturing company?
Yeah. So this was 1982 to 1990. We used gem quality diamonds to machine aluminum discs. Those were then packaged and shipped out to Silicon Valley, and a substrate coating, similar to what you would find on cassette tapes, if listeners know what cassette tapes are, was applied to the aluminum discs, and then they were put in hard drives. It was just at the genesis of PCs, personal computers, coming into the workplace en masse and into our homes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, fascinating.
That is fascinating. I had not heard that before. So it was acquired then by a Fortune 500 company.
It was.
And your boss looked around and said,
You're it.
Maggie, you can do just about anything.
Sure. Figure this out.
Figure this one out.
And so I did. And that was a marvelous opportunity to really take all I had learned about the business and then look at it through the lens of people. That was coincidental to that Fortune 500 company doing what the Big Three and some other large organizations in the United States did at that time, which was to retain the services of Dr. W. Edwards Deming. And so our humble little operation in Central Illinois buckled down. We had a very small management team. There were just 5 of us. And began to study Dr. Deming's philosophy, did brown bag lunches, and watched his 12 hours of incredibly boring video.
So for our listeners, though, let me step back.
Sure.
Would you just tell us who Dr. Deming is for those who may not have heard of him?
Sure. So most folks these days are familiar with Lean or Six Sigma or Total Quality Management. And Dr. W. Edwards Deming was an American statistician who had been involved in an incredible array of things, how the census is done, creating structures for tariffs for trucking, and provided great assistance during World War II in the manufacture of warfare items as well. After World War II, the Japanese Union of Engineers invited him to Japan to help them rebuild their economy. They embraced his philosophy and practices in statistical process control so robustly that even today, the Deming Prize still exists in Japan and is highly coveted. So Dr. Deming was brought to America's attention by a white paper that NBC aired in the early 80s entitled, "If Japan Can, Why Can't We?" That resonated with executives. The Big Three was starting to lose ground to the Japanese car manufacturers, disassembled them, and discovered that their variances in things like transmissions were incredibly small. Whereas Deming always said American manufacturing was like, let's make toast. You burn, I'll scrape. And so through the application of both his methodology and statistical process control and his philosophy for management, his 14 points for management and 7 deadly diseases were really the philosophy that we embraced as an organization, and in fact became recognized within that Fortune 500 company as the sole location that had fully embraced his methodology.
So you not only went through the training program with Dr. Deming, but I understand you had a chance to work side by side with him.
Yes, in part because of the robustness of the reputation that we earned based on the choices that we made. Dr. Deming came to our facility 4 times over the last 4 years that I was there. And we met with him as a management team. He met with our entire workforce. And I'm trying to think. So I think he was born in 1899. So when he came to us in 1987, for example, he would have been 86 years old.
Wow, remarkable.
And
Still brilliant.
Still brilliant.
Yes.
Still vibrant, really impactful in the entire workforce. And really, for me, it was more in retrospect that I realized that I'd enjoyed such a unique experience. The adoption of his philosophy really created the foundation for how I look at organizations and how I look at the people operations within those organizations.
And it seems as though you have an affinity for manufacturing. You spent time in manufacturing. Do you think that's where that groundwork was laid?
I think so, because in manufacturing, you're really focused on the production of a product. Mm-hmm. You have a before and after. You have a process that supports that production and so forth, and it naturally flows with his philosophy and methodology more clearly than in a service industry or other kinds of industries, although there have been great successes in other industries that have adopted his philosophy as well.
It seems like in manufacturing you have more control over variables than you do in a service industry.
And that may be the difference, right? Yeah, because you are applying a lot of time, energy, and effort from an engineering standpoint, from a research and development standpoint, and then certainly from the manufacturing itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so from the disc manufacturing, where did you head from there?
I was recommended by one of the folks that had been a supervisor in that organization to a subsidiary of Caterpillar that happened to be down the street.
Okay.
And went and interviewed for their HR position, got a thanks but no thanks letter, and then 2 weeks later got a call.
Oh.
And said, hey, our candidate ended up taking a different opportunity. So if you are still interested, we'd love to invite you to the team. That was a fascinating organization. That facility manufactured all the liquid filters for Caterpillar engines around the world, 800,000 filters a month. And my favorite color was highway yellow.
Oh, yes. We know that for Caterpillar.
Right. So worked with that group. It was 24/7, predominantly male organization, as most manufacturing organizations were and maybe still are. And ultimately decided in a couple of years after having been there and achieved some great things that we wanted to relocate, and that brought us to Chattanooga.
Okay.
And so I joined Chattanooga Group when we relocated to Chattanooga in 1995.
And you've been here ever since.
I've been here ever since.
That's great.
30 years this year.
So at what point then you came here and joined the Chattanooga Group? At what point did you decide to start your own company?
So I was with Chattanooga Group for 3.5 years and then was invited to join CBL Properties as their first ever HR professional. Spent a couple of decades with them, helping create the kind of place I always wanted to work.
Yeah, and for our listeners, the CBL Group, they own malls.
Correct.
And quite a few around the nation. It isn't just here in Chattanooga, but...
Right. Yeah, at our peak, we had 95 properties that we either owned or managed, and we had employees in 26 states.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great organization. I had the opportunity once when I was working, they asked me to come and speak to their national sales meeting.
Outstanding.
And talk about from the client perspective, being approached to by their sales team to do advertising in the various malls. And so that was exciting.
Yeah, it's a very dynamic group, fascinating industry, big change from manufacturing.
Right.
So for me, that was taking a big risk in taking a comfort level that I had achieved in working in manufacturing in an HR role and applying that in a very different industry.
So what prompted you to take that risk?
It was twofold. One was I felt like manufacturing was really on the decline in the mid-90s, and I was concerned about being in an industry where there would be fewer and fewer opportunities for growth. I had been in an organization in creating the HR function from the ground up. I had been in 2 organizations in recreating the HR function, and was highly attracted to that wide open opportunity of creating an HR function in such a diverse industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking back to the 90s, that was the farm crisis. And you're right, the Caterpillars, the International Harvester, the Deeres, they went through quite a challenging time. And then it was a time when retail was booming and they were building malls. So it seemed to be a perfect juncture for you to jump from one industry to the next.
Yeah. And from an historical perspective, I'd like to think that was brilliantly planned out. It just worked that way because I was recommended to CBL based on the work I had done at Chattanooga Group.
Okay. All right. And you were with CBL for a couple of decades.
Mm-hmm.
And then when most people would decide to retire, you decided to unretire, right? Yeah. So tell us about making that leap from you had the comfort of being in an organization you knew very well after 2 decades. It was time when most people would think about riding off into the sunset, but you made another leap.
I did. And I said at the time, I'm not retiring, I'm refiring. Refiring. So that was a long-held aspiration. I created HR Habitude in 2011, and simply because I became enamored with the word habitude, and I just wanted to lock it in, and then I maintained it out of vanity and sanity. So I always felt like I had a choice while I was figuring out really how did I want to approach that business. And a couple of years before I left CBL, I realized that making work a better place to be was essentially my purpose as an HR professional, and that manifests itself in lots of ways because I'm a business person first. But that seemed to really provide a basis for me to seriously begin thinking about launching HR Habitude or activating it. And the more I thought about it, the juncture of doing that at a point in time where it was a great time to pass the baton to another HR professional. and let the organization continue to grow and evolve. So that was really how it came together. Was I decided to do that in conjunction with my birthday, which was coincidental to being able to stay on the company's health insurance plan.
Okay.
Based on having been with the organization long enough and achieving that magical age.
Okay. All right. So tell me about your business model for HR Habitude.
So HR Habitude provides fractional human resources services. And really what that means is I can go in to an organization that has an HR presence and maybe lost a team member and they need somebody in just to cover that gap. And I've done that. I've helped organizations hire the position and more than one position to rebuild their HR team. Or I can go into organizations, and I have clients where this is true, that don't have HR but recognize that they have some specific needs that someone with my expertise can help fulfill, whether that be providing recruiting bandwidth or rewriting an employee handbook or doing an executive compensation analysis or you name it, anything that falls under the HR umbrella. Not that I'm expert at everything, but I have a good handle on what I can do effectively and efficiently for the benefit of the client.
And with your background in manufacturing and retail, you really can cover a wider gamut.
Yeah. So, and now I'm getting to enjoy experiences in transportation and construction as well. So I have a really interesting array of clients at present, and really delighted and pleased to work with each of them.
There won't be any industry you haven't touched by the time you do finally decide to ride off into the sunset.
I don't know. I have a couple that I probably will shy away
Oh,
from.
right. We won't talk about those.
One of my favorite things is it is as important to eliminate as it is to choose.
That's right.
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
So the average age of an entrepreneur is 36, and you bucked that trend and you started at 60. So what were the unique challenges you faced?
Well, I think that part of it is having an ability to go into an organization and see what their needs are, and generally working with folks that are younger than me. I have 2 clients. I was thinking about that. I have 2 clients that are my age or better in the leadership roles that I'm partnered with, and all the rest are younger than me. And so I'm trying to parlay that as a wonderful advantage for them to take advantage of.
Absolutely. And, with your background and your seasonality, you have seen a lot. So when you go into an organization, it seems as though you could quickly assess what the needs are and get up to speed faster than somebody who's really just getting started in the HR industry, because there probably isn't anything you haven't seen already.
Well, I always say when somebody asks me when I'm going to write my book,
right,
I always say I haven't seen it all, nor do I want to.
Oh, there's some things that are better left in the dark.
Yeah, I have seen a lot. And you're right. That is precisely the way that I've approached each of the clients that I've gone into. But one of the things that I learned in working in the corporate environment that I was in last was the wisdom of seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Mm-hmm.
And so while I've identified in pretty short order, one of my first clients went on site and spent a couple of hours with their senior leadership walking through the employee life cycle and made notes and came up with a list that represented probably a couple of years worth of work. They don't have HR. They're large, but they don't have HR. And rather than saying to them, here's all the things you need, I'm enabling that to unfold.
Mm-hmm.
So as we hit the highest priorities, then the next thing kind of bubbles up and we're able to address that. So ideally, I've tempered that so I don't overwhelm the client with all the things that I see that they need to do, but I do have the ability to go in and really identify some opportunities for improvement.
That's great. Did you experience any pushback, any ageism? Did that factor in as you started?
I haven't experienced it, or maybe I should say I haven't experienced it yet. I don't know what I don't know in terms of the preferences of clients, but generally I am able to parlay the experience and wisdom that I've gleaned into that advantage. And I think that part of what makes that not such an issue is that I approach every engagement as an opportunity to learn, and I have deep enthusiasm for what I do. And there are some specific areas within what I do that I have probably exuberant enthusiasm for that might work against me. Those are all, if I make, youthful attributes. And so maybe I'm not viewed as someone who's 62 now, more than someone who is excited for the opportunities that the client has to make improvements.
It seems as though the difference is you come in with an open attitude, wanting to listen more than you want to tell them what they need to do. So it is more of I'm here to serve you and be a partner than I'm an expert telling you that you've been doing something wrong and you should do it this way.
Yeah, I really do approach it from the standpoint of being a thought partner.
I woke up this morning stressing about a plan. Don't know which one to pick, I might need a hand.
Hi, they call me Medicare Misty.
She'll help to make the process smooth as whiskey, don't worry.
We work with several different carriers to make sure your coverage is not limited by a single company. Visit MedicareMisty.com and book your appointment today.
Don't worry, guarantee you'll be happy.
It struck me, you talked about, your motto, if you will, about having it be better than the last place that you worked. You're focused on the culture and the work environment. And today with, Gen Z, with millennial, it seems to be that's what they covet. They covet it having the work culture be somewhere where they want to be.
Yeah, and I think that in part, going all the way back to working with Dr. Deming, his philosophy is really based on that. It is about creating a place that if you pulled somebody off the street and say, what's it like to work where you work? Listen to the stories that they tell. Does that make you want to consider working there or refer someone there or not? Because really, that's the culture. It's not really whether you have a gym, or you let your dogs come to work, or flex time, or even hybrid versus on-site versus fully remote. Those are all attributes, but it's really the stories that employees tell about what it's like to work there that really enables somebody to understand the culture.
Yeah. What would you be telling your best friend about what it was like to go to work that day?
Exactly.
So that's an excellent point. So after you launched and you got started, was there a time when you had to pivot and go a different direction?
Yeah, so fascinating. When I really honed in on, okay, here's what I'm doing and here's when I'm doing it and so forth, my vision out of the gates was to focus on helping individuals. I love helping individuals navigate their careers. I've done it with folks at all levels, in all stages, and have a particular affinity and provide at no cost support to veterans in that regard. What I soon realized, and I'm talking about within 30 days, that I could be chasing individuals all day long, and they would be extremely hard to build a business that way. And so I pivoted to really focusing on providing organizational support and then looking for the opportunity to engage with individuals.
So do you think that ability to pivot that quickly, because most people would go through an agonizing period of trying to make it work do you attribute that to your background in the organizational development, in the practices of Deming? It was more of a try this, re-engineer, go a different direction, but you did it quickly. 30 days is fast.
Yeah, it was fast, and it might have been 45 days, but it was still fast between activation and then realizing that I needed to shift my focus. And I attribute it mostly to prayer, truly.
Right.
I just really stepped back because this was an entirely new venture. I love learning. And as I looked at where I could be most impactful and build a successful business, it was really in focusing on clients that needed that broader HR experience.
Okay, that's great. So let me ask you this question. You said you had worked in male-dominated industries before.
Yep.
And so how did you successfully navigate those power structures as a female without alienating the men in the organization?
Yeah, so it probably helps that I'm almost 6 feet tall. I'm not kidding.
I'm sure that does.
I'm not kidding, right? So I think that, again, I go back to that earliest organizational setting where there were 5 of us on the management team. There were three men and 2 women.
Mm-hmm.
And the men in that group held such deep regard for the capabilities that the woman brought. She was brilliant in finance and accounting. And as a startup who is privately held and aspires to be acquired, finance and accounting is where it's at. I mean, you've got to make everything else happen, but certainly to position the organization appropriately, that's where it starts and ends. And so, not without some bumps along the way, I have my stories that I could have told in the Me Too movement when that really emerged in 2018. For me professionally, I was so well served by an engineer that we brought into the disc manufacturing company probably after I had gotten into personnel. So I'd been there maybe 5 or 6 years when he joined the team. And I'll always say that John was an old crusty engineer that had traveled the world. But he pulled me aside one day and said, "Maggie, you are not always going to be the youngest or cutest member of the management team. So make sure whatever you do, wherever you go, that you offer substance over style."
That is very powerful. And I think we need to reiterate that because so many times when a woman is younger, she can persuade based on her looks or based on, as you mentioned, the style, coming in looking a certain way. And it isn't necessarily the thoughts that she has. It isn't necessarily the ideas, but it may be because a man is hoping to gain a favor by going along with her ideas. And, you know, when you're young, it's tempting to use that influence to get your way and move up. But as you mentioned, it's fleeting. You're not always going to be that young, cute thing in the room. And then what kind of a reputation are you developing for yourself? So to be known, for not necessarily the substance, but for influence in the wrong way. We all want to be able to generate influence based on our ideas, based on to be a thought leader, not necessarily because, we're cute and wear short skirts.
Right. Yeah. John Hamilton, I got chills saying that out loud to you.
Yeah.
Because John did me such a great service.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad that you said that.
Yeah.
It is very prevalent in a male-dominated industry.
Yeah. So doesn't mean that you can't dress well and be attractive or whatever that, translates to for you. And certainly I never tried to be one of the guys. Now, I happen to be a big fan of sports. The woman who was on the original management team that I was part of was a huge sports fan. And I saw how she enabled that passion to be able to have conversations that were meaningful and relevant in that context and hold her own and be knowledgeable around that. So those were all early life lessons, but John was really the tipping point for me.
Yeah. So, excuse me, for women in the workplace who might be in a setting where there are powerful men and they're afraid to speak up, what are some recommendations you would have for them?
I think that, the whole premise of Candor and Courage at Work, the podcast that Denise and I do, is about enabling professionals to be more successful by wisely applying being candid and experiencing and practicing that courage. And there are a lot of steps that individuals can take to do both of those things. For me, one area of specialization is managing up. And so for women who are in environments where they're perhaps reporting to a powerful male, I would suggest really digging into and learning effective techniques for managing up. And so it's looking at what's his communication style, what's the cadence of communication preferred, what's the kind of communication preferred. So some prefer one-on-one meetings, some prefer to get emails, those kinds of things. And just use those tools wisely. And it does take courage. But the interesting thing about courage and candor is that the more you do it, the easier it becomes because they're skills. You're building those as skills like you do anything else.
Right. Know your audience.
Read the room.
Read the room.
Yep.
Yeah. That brings me to an interesting point. I was listening to Mel Robbins, and she was talking about using intuition at work. And oftentimes, women have powerful internal compasses and powerful intuition, but they often fail to follow that because their emotions take over. So when you're facing a very difficult work decision like you did, you relied on prayer. How can we be more confident in our own internal compass and our own intuition when we need to make difficult decisions?
I think that's a great question. I'm not sure that I have the answer. First of all, my intuition is telling me, no, don't try to
Don't try and answer it.
don't try to come across as having the answer to that.
Yeah.
I can tell you, based on my experiences, I have come to rely on my intuition. And I think for me, it's a combination of ensuring that I push pause. I'm big on reflecting. And there are times where you don't have that opportunity. Something's on fire and you've got to react. And sometimes you get it right and sometimes you don't. And so in those instances, it's important to make sure you give yourself grace and then reflect on what could have been done differently, what you would do differently going forward. I think that's probably as close as I can get to saying, here's how to rely on your intuition.
I think that's an excellent answer because if we're acting on emotion, we may act too quickly. But if we're trying to listen to what our intuition is telling us, as you said, press pause, step back. If you have the time, it's not hair on fire, step back and weigh the alternatives of if I take this course of action, what's likely to happen? And if I don't take this course of action, what's likely to happen? And it gives you the opportunity to kind of vet and honor your intuition.
I think that's well put. That's important to know that you are intentionally giving it its due space and time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you think are some of the most important factors? You built your business pretty quickly in 2 years. What were the most important factors that led to that success? If you would have to reflect back, it would be
One word, relationships.
yes,
All of my clients have come by way of referral.
word of mouth.
Word of mouth. I still do business development. I talked with a business owner yesterday in town, and she was talking about struggling with business development. And I told her I'm still doing it because it's a craft and a skill I want to learn and understand and become more effective at. But fortunately, all of my clients have come by way of referral. I still have to close the deal.
Right.
So it's not just like, hey, I've got the perfect solution for you, and then I show up and it's done. It is still going through the process of understanding what are the needs and the pain points. What's their budget? What appetite do they have for a little or a lot? You know, where do we start? All those kinds of things.
So you have perfected almost the approach of listening first and planning second.
I hope I've gotten that lesson down.
Yeah.
I still
That's what I
find
keep
myself.
hearing loud and clear.
Yeah.
Don't go in as the expert that tells them what they need right off the bat.
Yeah, I was never a fan of that when I had folks coming into my workplaces.
Right. Amen. Amen. We always had consultants coming in.
And so, you know, I had somebody a long time ago that told me expert is a word for something. I can't remember what all it is, but spurt is kind
Spurt.
of part of it. You know? So I'm like, well, I don't want to be that. And so, yeah, it is really understanding what the need is, and then if I have the capability of helping them. I have certainly made referrals to other colleagues in this space. If I don't have the capability, or if I don't have the bandwidth to meet their needs fully, I don't want to shortchange them.
Mm-hmm. That's an important lesson as well, knowing your limitations.
Mm-hmm.
So, very important.
Yeah.
Let me then ask you how you keep yourself motivated.
Well, that's easy. I love to learn. And I'm an early morning person, so it's not unusual for me at all when I'm walking my dog very early in the morning to be thinking about solutions for clients, solutions on how I'm going to approach something, solutions on how I can help them overcome some challenge and so forth. I just love to learn. I love to enable success. And especially am passionate about helping HR professionals be business people and build those skills and operate in that fashion. And so I don't have any trouble being motivated to do what I'm doing.
So at the opposite end of that, being an entrepreneur, as you mentioned, who loves to learn and is always thinking about business, how do you carve out time for your personal life, and how do you balance the personal and the business?
So going into this, some of the things that I set forth as boundaries, I won't say never, because I don't believe in having that hard of a boundary, but I don't work on weekends. I maintain basically a business hours schedule. I have clients who reach out to me outside of that, and I always deflect to, this can wait till tomorrow morning. Let's connect then. Because I am training my clients in their perceptions around my availability. So I'm responsive, but I'm not diving in at 7:00 at night if they reach out. And so I have a wonderful personal life. I have a lot of fun. I insist on I always have fun at work too, but there are things that I'm passionate about. Derby Day just happened.
Yes.
And, so there was everything around the preparations for that and making sure that those things are taken care of. They're really important things in taking care of my family.
That's great. And you mentioned you're somewhat training your clients that what can wait and what can't wait. That might be helping them in the workplace too.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so.
I do too.
I haven't had a client yet who's been like, this is unreasonable. If I reach out to you, I want to talk with you right then. And so I may lose clients over it, and that's part of the joy of being an entrepreneur as well, right? Because they need to make choices based on what works for them. If that's what they want, I'm not it.
Right. And that's okay.
And I'm okay with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So what are your long-term goals for your business?
Well, I think ultimately growing HR Habitude, I've got a handful of folks in mind that I love to work with, that I've worked with previously, that I would love to work with again. I've already had that opportunity once with one of those folks that I have in mind, and not having had the bandwidth to meet a client need at year end in the beginning of this year. So was able to bring him on and have him do that work under the HR Habitude umbrella to meet the needs of the client. And to grow it to the point where I get to be surrounded with those folks who truly inspire and motivate me just because of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Very vague, right?
Right.
And that's okay.
That's all right. It allows you to pivot when you need to pivot and take advantage of opportunities as you have your entire career.
Yeah, that's what it's about. So I don't have a, in 2029 it's going to be XYZ. We're going to play it out, but I'd love to work with all those folks again.
That's great. So do you see there are exciting opportunities in the HR industry as a whole?
I think so. And for better or worse, that's the silver lining out of COVID. I think prior to COVID, HR struggled to be viewed as critically as is appropriate in the eyes of many senior leaders. When COVID came along, HR had to rise to that challenge. And I think that's when some senior leaders recognized that they had this organization, business, whatever it may be in the form of, but without people, it was just a building or just a place or whatever their business is or organization is. And so that lent itself well to elevating HR. If HR professionals are smart and have taken advantage of that opportunity, despite the fact I think they're all suffering from PTSD as a result of going through COVID,
right?
They have repositioned themselves as business partners to senior leadership and can effectively align the people operation strategy with the organizational strategy in a way that prior to COVID happened, but happened less frequently than it is today.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It seemed as though prior to COVID, it was more, I hate to say, of a punitive function, but if you said the word HR, people were like, oh no, are you in trouble?
Yes.
And to see now an evolution to, as you said, a strategic partnership where, and perhaps it's because there's more of a focus on the people culture of the organization that HR is able to step in and shine in that aspect.
I think so. And it's fun. I had somebody ask me last week, what's it like seeing all the things that you envisioned and drove for so many years now coming to fruition? I'm like, it's wonderful to see it happen more broadly and intentionally, this awareness around the criticality of having a wonderful value proposition, having an intentional culture that distinguishes your ability to attract and retain talent, those kinds of things, and really drive business results. But I also said, I'm so excited about what's coming down the pike because I'm a futurist. So I'm always looking out at what's coming.
What's the next step?
Yeah.
So how do you think ChatGPT and AI is going to impact or has already impacted HR?
It has impacted HR. And I think that if you look at the rate of change, the adoption of the internet and so on and so forth, and look at those timelines, what's going to happen with AI is going to happen and is happening so very quickly that those early adopters or those who are jumping in now to understand, how can I utilize this capability as a tool, like you did Excel or Word or spell check or,
Right.
Googling something, whatever. Those are all tools to look at AI in the same way and begin to really understand, how can this tool most effectively be used to free me up to focus on what's really important.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I don't think it's something to be feared, but as you mentioned, it's just another aid, and you use many aids in the workplace.
Yeah, I think my cautionary tale around AI is probably twofold. One, I do a lot of work with judgment index assessment, which we could do a whole show based on that, Lisa. That's where my exuberant enthusiasm really, really comes into play, because it's incredibly insightful. But the reality of all of the AI tools not being built to a values-based standard causes me concern.
Do you think it'll get there? Do you think it will evolve?
It's the wild, wild west. I don't know. Having started my career in the high-tech industry, that was also the wild, wild west.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, big swings and changes very rapidly, and big influences as a result. So we'll see whether that works out that way. But also, I think the concern that I have is people will become over-reliant on AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see that in some of the writing that is happening, where you have to still impart your thoughts and your research and your background, and you can't be lazy and let AI do all of your writing.
I'm concerned about critical thinking.
Yes.
It's not going to have the answer to every question.
That's right. And sometimes it's wrong, and people need to remember that it is not faultless. Sometimes you have to research the answers that you're being given to make sure those are actually correct answers.
Yeah. And then with that awareness, AI is a wonderful tool, especially for HR.
So if I'm a young woman and I want to enter the HR profession today, what would you recommend as the essential, I don't want to say tools, but perhaps background and knowledge, and where should I be thinking that I need to make sure I have a good education on certain aspects?
Yeah, so if you look at the offerings at the collegiate level, focusing on HR management specifically, or doing a dual degree in business administration and HR management, pursuing graduate level work and IO Psych are all wonderful means to ensure a good, solid foundation. Mm. There's still also the opportunity to grow up within an organization if you have a good mentor and if you love to learn. They're still homegrown. I'm helping one client right now who's elevated an internal candidate into a role that includes HR responsibilities, and so I'm able to provide some mentoring and guidance. I definitely recommend certification, because the body of knowledge of HR within that context is clearly defined, and so it gives you a really good roadmap of, here's all the foundational things that I need to have an understanding of. Not necessarily depth in, but enough to know when I'm stepping into it so that I can get the appropriate kind of help.
And is that SHRM, do they call it?
SHRM is one, and HRCI is the other.
Okay.
They split ways moons and moons ago, much to my chagrin. And so now each offers certification opportunities based on that body of knowledge.
Okay. That's great to know. We'll make sure that we note that in the show notes in case people want to go looking for that certification.
Yeah, I think even just looking at the body of knowledge, so you can get the certification handbooks or guides from either of those organizations, and those provide a great overview of the breadth and depth of the knowledge that a successful HR professional needs to have.
Mm-hmm. So from an entrepreneur standpoint, though, what recommendations do you have for somebody who's out there thinking about a business? They're maybe in a full-time position, but they had this kernel of an idea generating in their mind. What recommendations do you have?
Yeah, I would endeavor to network with others who have done it, to ask them what's the upside and the downside. I created a board of directors.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't realize, so I didn't set out to create a board of directors. I backed into creating a board of directors. And it started with connecting with a couple of folks who were very entrepreneurial and who, one was right in the process of stepping out from a very lucrative career in the legal field. One was someone who had enjoyed a long history of success in the work world, I'll leave it at that, who had launched a business many moons ago. And the other was somebody who came to Chattanooga 10 years after I did and utilized his familiarity with an assessment tool to essentially come along CEOs and serve as a co-CEO kind of behind the scenes. And so that was the core of my board. I added a woman locally who I have deep regard for. I think we mentor each other. And then another HR professional who had been through some really fantastic experiences, far different from my own. I haven't operated in the global environment. And so those folks ultimately became my board, so much so that the first three I described, I finally fessed up when we all were having breakfast together one morning. I said, just so you know, you are my board of directors.
Oh.
And they're all like, oh, well, I never really thought about it. But putting it out there and putting it that way enabled them to think differently about the questions I was asking. And they asked me questions too. This is not all just about me taking from them. It is, I've referred all of them I have referred to opportunities and will continue to do so. There's not a lack of opportunity to do that, to share that wealth. And so somebody who's in an environment where they're aspiring to step out on their own and create something that's important to them may be well served by starting by creating their own board of directors.
I have not heard that recommendation before, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because suddenly then they have almost an vested interest in the success of your company.
Yeah, it's very interesting, again, to reflect on that. And that board has been in place for 12 years.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
So it's not just something that I did when I was like, ooh, let me go out on my own. It was just something, again, I backed into it. I didn't really recognize what I was doing until I got to a juncture where I'm like, all right, yeah, let's just all get together. You're my board.
Well, you fostered relationships first. And that goes back to what you said about networking.
Yeah.
You networked your way into it.
I did. That's probably a really good way to make that clear, was that it was investing the time, energy, and effort to get to know the person, what was important to them, what their successes were, what their challenges were, how I could help them.
That's your compass. That's your true north in everything that you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like that. Okay, I'm going to transition and ask you a few personal questions.
Sure.
So what books are on your bedside table?
Well, I know when we got together last, I mentioned Jamie Kern Lima. I always want to make Lima her middle name or maiden name, but Worthy. because I so enjoyed Believe It. And it's funny that you mentioned Mel Robbins, because the 5-second rule was one that was just recommended to me and now has bubbled up to also be one that I read. And then because I recommended it to a client who's just burgeoning, and they went from 1 employee to 5, which is a big deal for them. I've recommended The Servant Leader by James Autry.
That's a great one.
That's the book I wish I had written.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been a long time since I've read it. And so in making that recommendation and realizing that our check-in meetings, just had one yesterday with her, we're likely going to touch on that. I'm like, you probably need to brush up on it, and it'd just be good anyway.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a great one.
Yeah.
So what legacy do you wish to leave, Maggie?
I hope to be remembered, as somebody who elevated the field of human resources and served as a role model on being a strong female leader.
Mm-hmm.
I've approached everything that I've done with deep and unrelenting curiosity and wonder, and certainly helping make work a better place to be.
I love that. And I think you are well on your way to having that legacy.
Thank you.
So who is keeping you inspired today as you're out inspiring so many people?
Well, I still go back to Dr. Deming because that's so foundational to who I am and how I think about things. But I'm really, really inspired by all of those professionals that I engage with who are simply aspiring to be more positively impactful in their roles. I work with a good number of HR professionals, but I work with leaders outside of human resources as well. And as much as I used to pray for courage and wisdom and strength, and then when I went out on my own, I added discernment to that because I recognized that I would be picking the people that I work with. And they're all inspiring me.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Hugely rewarding.
Well, this has been delightful. I thank you for joining me today, Maggie. Would you share with our listeners how they can contact you?
Sure. Thank you. HR Habitude, HABITUDE.com is a way to get a better understanding of what we're about, as well as provides a link to my calendar. So feel free to take advantage of that opportunity to reach out. All those initial conversations are complimentary, of course. And then within that website, there is the podcast page for Candor and Courage at work.com, which we drop new episodes the first of each month. They're nominally 20 minutes long. And our goal is to enable other professionals to be more successful based on our experiences.
That's wonderful. And I encourage you to listen. It is get in the car on your way to work and pop it in. And it's a wonderful podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today.
I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to kind of reflect on where I am and where I've come from. This has been really meaningful for me.
Oh, wonderful. It's an inspiring story.
Thank you.
It really is. Well, for our listeners, please join me on the next episode of The Empowered Career Woman. I also ask if you enjoy this podcast, please share it and visit our Facebook page. It is at emp.career.woman. And I'll share that funny story. Facebook would not let me use the word empowered. They said it was embargoed. So it is emp.career.woman. The Empowered Career Woman is proudly presented by Medicare Misty. Medicare Misty is a real person who can help answer your Medicare questions. Get real help from her team at MedicareMisty.com. The rise to the top, it is not always a straight line. Sometimes the bend in the road is the most challenging, yet it leads us to where we are meant to be. If you are an inspiring business leader or entrepreneur, join us next time as we share stories of those who made it to the top. I'm Lisa, and I'll see you next time.